I always get a microphone check. 1, 2. What is this?
Is Joanne. And Joanne is a developer who has done some incredible projects in Miami as well as
Milwaukee.
Milwaukee,
Yes, and Baltimore and
Baltimore,
Houston. Yeah.
Houston, like Essence cover. She's just amazing. So really excited for her to share a little bit about her story today. Tony is going to kind of moderate a discussion. I think he'll share a little bit about his story too. Do
Yes,
you mind,
please.
Tony, a little bit?
Very brief.
Yeah? Okay. All right. Y'all give it up.
Welcome back.
Yay.
Thank you. That's loud, right?
Hello, yeah, but it's fine.
Pretty loud. So my name is Tony Clark, and I'm excited to be here with my dear friend Joanne. And it was interesting. I was having a conversation in the lobby, and I was saying to the individuals is that, and I think it's apropos to this conversation today, is that Joanne and I went to college together. She says she met me at a party, but I don't particularly remember that. But we had it. We connected years later, and then we didn't talk for roughly maybe 20, 25 years or so. And we found each other, and essentially, we started talking about. She was very curious about the work that I was doing as a human, and I think that as she talks about her work today, I think it's really important to keep in mind there's a human element to this particular work. I think a lot of times that folks like myself, who is not in your space, I'm a researcher by trade, and so I ask a lot of questions, and so a lot of our conversations have been rooted in that. And so when she asked me to come today, I was like, yeah, it's really cool. I'd love to be a part of the audience. She said, no, I would love to kind of curate the conversations that we have. So I think the happiest folks on my end are my students, because I'm not there today. And so I'm totally excited to be here with you. So when I looked at the title, and I think as we all see this title, we see a zero and we see 100 million, right? That excites us. Would that be fair to say? And one of the things in which I would love you to share, Joanne, is a lot of times, myself included, I'm really excited about the how. How do I get whatever I want? But one thing, as I'm growing and evolving as an individual, I need to kind of tap into the why. Because when you go on a journey such as whatever, if it's to do whatever kind of seek out to do, there has to be a fundamental why. So if you could kind of talk to us a little bit, I know folks have a little information about the information in their packets, but I've learned a lot about Joanne from about her parents and their work, and I think that's connected to your why. So if you could talk a little bit about the why, that'd be really great.
Awesome. Thank you, dear friend, and a very humble, wonderful dear friend. So for me, it is critical to think about the why, and everything that I endeavor to do is really rooted into my community, all who work, live, and serve there, and looking at them, at us, through this very asset-rich lens. And so when I think about assets, I say, okay, this is not my story. This is not a development that I intend to bend. This is a development opportunity and community to think about how we move forward as a we. So everything that I've done to date, I was born into this work by social workers. I am a social worker by trade. And one of our fundamental underpinnings is the right to self-determination. So I started this work as a researcher, and I raised a lot of money for other people and didn't see clear and evident impact in community. So I took those skills, and my mother, this is a long story long, so walk with me just for a little bit and we'll get there. My mother retired from corporate America, invested, and allowed the opportunity for community residents to voice their desires. And through that work, we garnered over $200 million worth of reinvestment in the community. So I brought my organizational leadership, my research into this work, and here we are 20 years later, and that continues. So when we look at 0 to 100 million, this is how I got here, through relationships, right relationships. Of course, I need to understand investments and performers and the numbers and the math, but where we really, really find this work is most impactful, most sustainable, is when we don't go alone. And so when I see you all here, I know there's varied experiences, desires. The one thing as you will have this conversation and it moves forward is to implore you to bring your assets to the table and to understand that as community, we are gifted. And so that is how I endeavor to do this work. A lot of the work that I do on Main Street with Main Street redevelopments aren't bankable. So how do we get the work done when we see that there's a need? It requires our community to rally. So one of my models for redevelopment is, I want a triple bottom line. I want to build wealth, I want to protect and serve in the environment, and I want to bring community with me. And so in order to do that, I've leveraged a mechanism that allows communities and my neighbors to own and be a part of the investment strategy.
It's great. So I don't know about you guys, but I know for me, as I said, I hadn't talked to Joanne for a while, and then I got this random email, and I was like, "Who's this?" And she had I don't know, the picture wasn't her. It was like a cartoon, like from maybe
Superwoman.
like a superwoman. I'm like, I don't know about y'all. I was like, let me Google this particular person. And when I Googled, I essentially learned about the work at Sherman Phoenix, which I'm certain folks have read about. And one of the things that, as I was reading about Sherman Phoenix and your work there, I was particularly interested. We're in a very interesting time. We're seeing a great deal of civil unrest. Would that be fair to say? And in the midst of the civil unrest, there becomes a level of kind of hopelessness at times. And what's so kind of indicative of your story was that we can talk a little about Sherman Phoenix, and you took over a bank that was burned down by community because maybe of feeling like they were, marginalized, and you helped uproot that and to kind of create this engine.
Absolutely. So the Sherman Phoenix, I was probably about 11 years into my development journey. I'm also a social entrepreneur, so I buy businesses with the intention of nurturing ownership with those who decide to journey with me and work with me. They ultimately, if their heart's desire, will become owners in the business. So at that time, I had a business. It was called The Juice Kitchen. And we had a New York Times reporter that was following us around. We ended up being, the article fell during the time where an African-American brother was shot in the back and there was civil unrest. So they were burning buildings in Milwaukee, looting. It was a sign of a desire to no longer rest in the place of being unseen. And so from there, the article came out. We were on the front page of the New York Times, above the fold, and it said trapped, right? And so from there, and it kind of glorified the work, but the word trapped, right? I made a decision to be in community because I valued what that community not only had to offer me, but what I had to offer. And so that is how the Sherman Phoenix was birthed. We were mentioned in the article, one of my businesses, as a balm, right? A balm for the community. And what would that look like if this balm was activated to ensure that, this word disenfranchised community, we're not that, right? Well, resourced folks that lived in the community, what does that look like to bring your resources to bear? So I say all that to say the Sherman Phoenix was birthed. We were called to the table. What if we came, and at the time, my business was roughly 900 square feet of space. We were asked by the mayor at the time to look at a 20,000 square foot building, a lot bigger than 900 square feet, as you can imagine, as you know, and we said yes. So we went to take this burnt, blighted building and transform it into community purpose. We had charrettes, we hired architects, and we brought our neighbors, we brought our entrepreneurs to say, how can we use this space for community good, for its highest purpose? Now this building, we bought it from BMO Harris, it was a BMO Harris Bank at the time. We bought it as a cash deal, and it wasn't a bankable deal. And so we had to figure out how we were going to raise the dollars to bring this building back to life. And we did that. It was about an $8 million raise. And as a result, we ended up having 29 Black and brown entrepreneurs in the space. We have been in existence. I've sold the building. I developed a nonprofit, sold the building to the nonprofit, and a lot of it became a catalytic endeavor. And so when we talk about the 0 to a million, I'm doubling down on the fact that we got here as a result of neighbors investing. So we had angel investors, and we also had 150 neighbors that joined us on the journey. And so investment minimums, to get into the details, roughly 1,500 as a minimum. But then we had also angel investors that came into the deal, philanthropic organizations, and a few local and national, just in terms of getting into look like a detailed group of folk that want to know the details. But that's how we built the capital stack. And so from there, it became a national call. How do you use crowdfunding to develop marketplaces, to develop markets, to develop central cities? And since then, since that date, I've supported over 25 markets, communities to do the same. And I also integrated lessons, right? One of the biggest lessons was we needed housing, right? And so now that I think about adjusting the model, now every model that I support and communities, I lend that level of learning, that now we need to think about not just the entrepreneur aspect of it, not just the development focus, but also what other community good can we add when we think about doing a development such as a marketplace.
You know, one of the things, and I obviously want to leave some time for questions, and I'm talking to the brother who put our mics on, and we were having a conversation about some of the things that we do. And one thing that I think is important to know, and would love to get your thoughts on this, is you use the word we a lot. Mm-hmm. Who is the we? Mm-hmm. And how do you equip the we with the language to be a part of the collective? I say that because, you know, obviously the folks in this room have a vested interest in your work and you know the language. But how do you create what you're talking about, kind of like a bunch of weeks, right? Mm. A movement. And I think it's actually kind of emblematic that today the life of the late Reverend Jesse Jackson is being celebrated. And I'm often, yeah, please clap. But I often think about in terms of what was the organization that did not happen to create an ecosystem so that we can become a we 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and that we is equipped with the language and the skills. So when you think about that, who's that we?
Question. When I think about the we, you know, and how I engage depends on the level of interest, the desire. But I know I had to be, everything that I've done well, I've been mentored into, I've been coached into. So I take that position as a mentor and a coach and a support. And so when I think about the we, I go back to this definition of community, all who work, live, and serve. So some people along this journey have wanted to be developers. So what does that look like? So I have, you know, mentored folks into deals. We've slow walked community around what does this investment model look like? So yes, you can invest in this, but then you can also, so there's case studies, there's dissertations around my work because I slow walked the dog, if you will, took the time to mentor and to ensure that the we, depending on their entry point, were supported. And so I think for me, it's understanding the desires. And I always say my work is a reflection of desires of my neighbors and my community. And so when I walk this slowly, it could be, you know, I've had about 6 young folks go through, become architects, right? We've nurtured PhDs, we've nurtured developers, and it takes the time. I say this thing that, you know, it's really my blessing to be able to support the we. And when I look at Blair, I look at Mikeia, this is the we. And I'm here as a result of people lending their gifts, their time, and their talent, and allowing me to take part, right? And we support each other. I think it's an understanding of how we all need to be shored up. And sometimes we just race fast. You know, the adage where it says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go, is it further? Yeah, then we need to go together. And so I've endeavored to go further. And it takes a little longer because we need to understand what our collective desires are and how we can meet those desires. and together. Does that get to it?
Yes, yes. I mean, I have another, made me think about something, and I kind of want to localize it, if I may, in terms of two things. You know, I often have joked with you, I vote, but you're civically engaged. And there's a difference, and I want to become more civically engaged. How do you kind of create those inroads into with policymakers and understanding that it has to be a relationship with folks that you may have ideological differences with, folks who may not necessarily be invested in ways in which you deem to be morally appropriate. And obviously, we understand the corporate entity side, but how do you work with those elected officials? And is there a value in having those relationships?
It is. I think policy plays a big part in it. And also, I feel like in some instances, I had to figure out how to do it anyway, right? I had to figure out, I had a project that was $70 million in Miami, and the city of Miami was a late adapter. So this level of gumption that says that sometimes we just can't wait. And we have to do our part. We have to have lobbyists. We have to understand the bills. We have to know what's coming. We need to understand our legislature, how we toe the line. But there also has to be this level of gumption that says we're going to do it anyway. And so my work cannot always be predicated on waiting for folks to understand or to get it, because there's a sense of urgency in our communities that say we have to do it anyway.
So let's talk. You talked about community. I want to think about the folks in the room. I don't know where everyone's from, but let's just hypothetically give a master class in terms of how do the folks in the room continue to build off their relationships, get to some of their goals, and there's 0 to a billion,
Ooh,
right?
0 to a billion.
0 to a billion. Like what's that look like? What are some 3 or 4 steps?
I would say this level of community is a part of it. I would say, this is my year of kind of shooting my shot. So nothing, and leaning into it with a sense of impossibility, right? Is there a piece of property? Is there a community? Is there a conversation? Because sometimes before we understand what the development needs, it's a conversation. So it means that we begin, that we start, that we don't necessarily say the political tides, the pendulum isn't where it needs to be. It's that we start. And so for me, it's being in conversation with folks who've either done the work, have the desire to do the work, and have a spirit of willingness to support. 1, all money is not good money. 2, all partners don't need to be a partner. So the spirit of discernment needs to be a part of it. And if I would say any lesson that is super critical is to lean into that spirit of discernment. The money will come, the people will come, and don't rush. It's okay to take it slow.
I think those claps, I want to actually open it up for a couple of questions. Are there any questions that want to be able to lend your genius to this conversation? Does anyone have a question?
That was deep right there.
That was, I was stumbled.
That was a drop the mic.
Yeah. I can continue, but are there any questions? Yeah, let's go. Yes,
Yeah.
you want to?
Oh, I'm sorry. How do you build trust amongst your community? Even like as far as like even with family members. So me and my family member might have a good idea to try to do something together, but there's still like some distrust between us as a community, as an African American community, to do crowdfunding with people who we may not necessarily personally know.
Yeah.
And even some of us who do know each other or are family members, there's still no connection there. How do we try to build that connection, to build trust amongst ourselves in our community so we can try to do a crowdfunding for something that's for our community?
Yeah, I think it's in terms of the term credible witness. And so you want to definitely do your due diligence. You don't want to, I think a lot of people begin this work with great intentions. And so for me, it's going into this space where you have a resident expert. I think that allows for a sense of trust and credibility not just you've done this work, but how have you done this work? And I always lean into the spirit of the work. So I could be doing this everywhere, but I make calculated decisions in terms of where I spend my energy. And so I think it's important not just to find experts in the field that have done this work that you can say they're not going to run off, because we've seen that too, right? I'm an expert, especially in this age of social media and Instagram. Where's the truth test, right? And so you really want to understand you want to see the work in action. I think that's important. A lot of times we're in this fast-paced way of seeing, and it looks so good. And they're driving the car that we want, and they live in the house that we want. But do they? And have they done the work? And so I think having credible witnesses, multiple witnesses, to say that they can testify to the good is important. And it's also okay to do things on a smaller scale with your family. So you can test the model where it's not going to set your life back, right? So it's also okay, my first endeavor was small. It was, the first thing I maybe 100,000. So it's not, now that's money. At the time, I'm not going to diminish that, but it's not to a place where there could be some kind of catastrophic, right? So start slow. It's okay. I think oftentimes we want to get to the millions, even the billions.
But to that, can I push on that?
Yeah, for sure.
To your question, and I want to bring you in, is that I think your question is so apropos, and when you look at your work, you do speak to, at least the articles speak to, re-engineering folks who have been marred by systemic racism. Mm-hmm. So if you've been marred by that, you may have an indifference to investing, even if it's with your favorite cousin who's the smartest person in the world. And so, can you continue to build on that? But think about, how do you kind of think about the re-engineering and the rewiring of folks? Like, I'm afraid to use Cash App because I didn't get the sneakers I didn't want, right? But so when you're telling me about an investment, how do you how do we think about that? And I say that because I have a dear cousin. He got in on Apple. He works at the post office, and he is now living really. And people thought he was out of his mind. But he was like talking to us about it and talking to us about it and talking to us about it. And now we want to stay at his house, And so,
you gotta take a risk. I think that, and it's calculated, and sometimes it's smaller, but it does require a risk. I bought a blighted, burned down bank that nobody could see the vision, right? So it was a risk. And I think we're at this, this state in our lives, in the history of this country where, what is the alternative? So I'd rather take the risk than kind of live and die on the sword.
Can I share a personal joke? So She and I have this personal joke. I have my shoes on, you have your shoes what?
Off.
She has her shoes off, right? I am a shoes on kind of person. Mm-hmm. And so how do you connect to the shoes on person?
I think that when you think about and do your homework and reach out and talk to real estate developers who have done the thing, who've done the crowdfunding, and that's where the credible witness comes into play. So shoes off is me being very much a little woo-woo, tap into your spirit, be into, but that to me, that's how I move. And I'm also very comfortable with numbers, and I'm very comfortable with things that are very practical and pragmatic. This is my pragmatic best friend. It's very detail oriented. Right?
I'm my Uncle Gerald. I don't trust nobody. That sounds too good. That just sounds too good.
So for me this is very real. This is very tangible. I can say that I contribute over $500,000 annually to the city economy of Milwaukee. It's tangible. You can touch it. It's real. So I can come up here and talk about intentions and feeling good and connectment and alignment, but everything is very tangible as well. So I'm not just talking around a sentimentality that allows us to feel empowered. I've done the thing. I've done the work. And so that's when we talk about the shoes on folks, you want to talk and you want to be connected to people who have done the work. And I can reiterate that. And I think it's James who presented earlier, I was talking about connecting with the developer, and he was like, you don't want to do that. And the developer is, a mega developer into the multi-billions, but it wasn't about him not being able to do the work, it was how he did the work. So I think it's also important to think about how you want to feel around when you move forward. So there's something to me that matters, right? It's not about just getting the deal done. I want to do this and I want to be happy when I do it. I want to do this and I want to feel good. I mean, it's not always, it's tough. It's a struggle, but I want to struggle with people that I enjoy. And so a lot of my life, my work is predicated on doing this thing with people that I enjoy. And that's a big part of it. And so shoes on means look at the numbers, right? Look at the previous results. Do your vet, talk, look at the circles. Don't just, think about IG and what looks good. So my shoes on and being really pragmatic is, what does the portfolio look like? What are, I think that's important to understand.
Brother, you had a question.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, can you talk to us about like length of time for some of your projects and how kind of
That's good.
kind of how that works
Yeah.
and how you kind of navigate that? Because real estate development is not a fast.
It is not. It is a slow roll. Yeah, it is a slow roll. And sometimes it moves fast, so you got to giddy up, right? So what do they say? If you're not, you got to stay ready so you don't have to get ready. So I found that some projects, I was in community, doing community charrettes, talking to neighbors, building it. It was over an 8-year period of time. So I built some housing developments. We talked to neighbors a little bit more. We slow walked it. So I mean, some of my work has taken 5 to 10 years to get to a $70 million kind of clip, to get to $100 million, to get into spaces where I'm a strategist on, a $400 million or $500 million deal. Because a lot of what I do is built on relationships. Everywhere I've been is because of right relationships. And that takes time. It takes time to build the trust. So it's a lengthy period. And then once you build the trust, sometimes there's deals everywhere. And then you have to make a decision. Because I can't do everything and I can't do everything well. And so now I'm in a position where there's always an opportunity. Because more than a, God bless you, more than a developer, I'm a strategist. And so I love to figure out how I put pieces together, how I build portfolios, how I build performance, how I make connections with folks, marketing, PR, because it's more than just the numbers, it's more than just the investors. It is a whole ecosystem. Now Tony is an educator, right? Has worked at Bunker Hill, Harvard, MIT, UPenn, and I think about all of the sectors that it requires. The conversation is also bigger than the physical entity that we're redeveloping. It's a whole social economic determinant conversation of our collective health and well-being. So to understand that and to go into that level of depth, it takes a lot of time. But then there's also, you have a model. So once you have a model that's been truth tested, now I can say I can consult in Baltimore, I can consult in Houston, I can consult nationally, internationally, because I understand how the mechanisms work. And it has to be modified and adjusted because all communities have different desires, different needs, and different resources. But once you get comfortable, you can play in this space.
Any other questions? Yes.
On the capital stack, can you just explain that a little bit? You said 1,500, a company, 150 people.
Yeah, so for that that transaction, we opened it up for crowdfunding. And and it depends on how much you're trying to raise. Because if you're trying to raise 100 million, you don't want, $1,500 to take $1,500 to get to 100 million, right? This was a smaller project, a couple of $1 million. So we were able to make that determination that we could take in $1,500 from 150 neighbors. So that was our cap. We ended up having an overflow of neighbors who wanted to invest. So with our real estate attorneys, we were able to just all the paperwork and all of the legal, how do you invest in legally? So there's the legal ramifications of investments that's different state by state. But we did all of that kind of due diligence and then opened it up. We did a call, we did a couple of videos. We did charrettes with our architectural partners to get neighbors to come in. So it was corporate partners made an initial investment. We had a couple of angel investors, and along with that 150 neighbors who also invested in the deal. And so when we sold it, they had the option of either donating their investment to the deal, or they were paid out. And so we had about 50% that donated, and then the rest took their payout. And so annually, they were given dividends from our our cash flow at the end of every year. So they were paid out.
Was that real estate?
Yes. So the way we earned revenue was through our 29 entrepreneurs and events. So we had a model where we would get revenue from our tenants, and then we ended up being a hub for an events hub. So anytime anybody with Kamala Harris, Biden, anytime anybody wanted to come into town, we became the epicenter of the happenings. Everybody wanted to be in community, so it ended up being an event center. So we didn't plan it, so that's another thing. Some things you live into that might not be a part of the initial vision.
So question back here. Yeah.
So for many of these developments, there's a long horizon before you get paid.
Hello.
Like 5 to 10 years or so. So I'm wondering, like, as a newer developer, how did you manage?
I paid myself first. I believed in me. So I didn't wait. I took my developer fee up front. Yeah, I wasn't doing that. No, but I understand. And so a lot of times the fix for that is developers will have multiple projects running. And then sometimes, developers will open construction firms and multiple streams of income to think about how to mitigate that time frame. But I always pay myself first. So if I'm bringing in a couple $1 million, I'm going to take my percentage and trust that I can raise it back.
Any other questions? I want to build off of something you mentioned, the puzzle. And I'm curious in terms of, my son loves puzzles, and he really gets upset when I lose pieces. And I get in trouble. So what happens if you have this puzzle and things you lose a piece, it's not fitting, in terms of understanding that it's a complicated, as you just laid out, this could take some time. What happens to that particular puzzle? How do you readjust to a deal in year 3?
Yeah, I think the important thing is this team. And so a lot of developers don't want to partner. A lot of people don't want to split developer fees. So there's a lot of trust issues. But for me, the importance is that I have, I'm always building a think tank. And so if something goes awry, or if there's something that I didn't consider, if I lose a piece of that puzzle, there are a league of folks that are ready to rise and support, to think around, because that happens all the time. I mean, down to doors not coming in and windows being ill-fitted, and your demolition crew, I could go on, your demolition crew not doing what they're supposed to do. There's an iliad of ways, development projects, you can lose that piece. And also to have a bench, right? Because sometimes you get in motion and people just can't do what they say they can do. And so what does that look like to have a bench of folks that can come in and support where there may have been someone that faltered?
Talk a little about that. I'm sorry, you have a question? You go. Talk a little about that bench. One of the things that a lot of folks do when they go into communities, they do asset mapping.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you think about when you're in a community, maybe that community you're from or very familiar with, how do you find the assets and identify who do you want on your team to have the bench in which you're speaking to?
Yeah, I think it's different by community, depending on the community that you're in. But I think there are, and that's where the time comes in, the time and the commitment to have the conversations. So there are, there are residents. I want to speak to the resident. I want to speak to the person that lives on the block around the corner from where I'm doing the development. I want to speak to the school teacher who works in the community. I want to have a conversation with the mayor, the senator. So I think having varied perspectives helps and supports the trajectory of the project and how you're informed. Because something that I always hear, I think this is you, Maikia, they will build it and they will come. That in fact is not the case. And so we're building this together. And that is my mode of operation. And sometimes some folks just have to get left behind, and that's just the reality of it. So there's a sense of kind of critical mass and understanding the folks. There's stages of readiness, and if you're ready, then we're gonna go. But it's deliberate. Sometimes it's time sensitive because we've been waiting a very, very long time to have momentum, to even have critical mass around a topic, critical mass around a need that we're moving forward, that we're changing. So we have the conversations, but we can't wait forever. Everybody's not going to be aligned.
Can you talk a little bit about the importance of structure? We live in a time where we have meetings for the meetings. And we are obsessed with meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do we have these, because you're talking about big money. You guys are talking about big dollars. I grade papers, so we're talking two different things. But how do you kind of lock in to make sure these meetings are so meaningful? I read something, I think it was former President Clinton, and he would have these daily meetings. And if you were able to stand, you would stand. And they were 15-minute meetings. And they were just meetings every day. And they were 15, they were very clear, concise and coherent. And it was like, all right, we're done.
That's what I do. I have 15-minute scrums, and I'm not a big pontificator. Although I like to talk, I'm a little, as you can't tell, I am a pontificator. But when it comes to getting things done, I think there's a responsibility to be efficient, and a responsibility to be well-versed, and a responsibility to honor time. And I think that's very important. One of the things that I love to do when I'm nurturing or supporting or leading a team, and this is just a very practical matter, is 15 minutes at the top end of the week, 15 minutes at the end. But I a lot of times we can talk in circles and we miss the doing of it all. So I think it's very important to highlight where the doing and the impact meets a need for conversation. And sometimes there's a need to be in deep, thoughtful conversation, but we oftentimes in community get lost there. And it's important, I think it seems it's a bit into the details, into the weeds a bit, but how you curate your time is one of the biggest lessons that I've learned as a developer, as a strategist, as a business coach.
You guys, bless your hearts, you're waiting 3 to 5 years to close a deal. I don't know how that works. But you have to be around a team, a group of folks that you really want to be a part of. And
it matters.
You seem to be really happy. Talk about the work.
Happy. I'm the happiest that I've been in a very, very long time. And I've done deals with anybody you can name, celebrities, just anyone, and big deals, high rises. But I was tired, right? I was tired. I was exhausted. And so I said, well, I'm just going to retire. Until I met this woman who you heard from earlier, Miss Maikia. We were all brought together by James, who you heard from earlier, as a collective of developers. And the thought was, and I told James, I was like, I don't have energy to be a part of another think tank. I don't want to do that. I don't want to talk. I don't want to sit. I don't want to ponder about what could be, right? And as a result of me going against that initial inkling to resist, I found a community. And so that's what brought me here today. And that's what I've given speeches, I've spoke at the White House, I've done all of these things, but I found a home being in community again. And so that was what was important about having this conversation with Tony and me, not just being didactic and talking about my accolades and talking about the how. It was the importance of relationship. And so to spend time with my dearest friend, to spend time with you all in community, to be here in support and in wonderment of what you're doing, Blair, is what has kept me here and brought me so much joy. So I left my condo on the beach and I moved to Minnesota in the middle of the depths of winter, in the middle of a siege, of a federal siege, and I could not be more thankful. I think the miracle shows up as you allow, and I'm living in what I have prayed for. And so I'm comfortable ending on that note, if that works, if there's questions.
I had one more question, and I would love to open it up. Just one. I mean, as you were speaking, and And yesterday I had a meeting, and I usually don't talk. And I was like, I got to say something because I'm in the room, and we're talking about a subgroup of students that that reflect who I am. So when you're in these rooms, I mean, I often say, and so this lady was like, "You're talking a lot, and everything's not political." And I said, "I'm black. That's political." You know, in this space, that's very political, right? And so in your spaces, you come in maybe different, maybe unique in a lot of ways. And granted, when I re-met you, you were Superwoman, and you are. But how do you kind of be conscientious of your walking in these rooms, and it's not always going to be a welcome, and not just from a racial standpoint. Obviously, we're going to do gender and all that, but in terms of we think about these rooms, we still got a long way to go.
Yeah, I guess I've gotten to a point, good or bad, where I don't care anymore. I just don't, and I can't placate you. I can't. I'm just gonna show up in all of my excellence. And so that's where I've gotten. I can't defend. I can't bring you along, but you're gonna see me, and you're gonna be quite clear about my capabilities and where I'm headed if you're coming or you're not. And so I think that lack of fucks. I don't have any to give, and so yeah. It's you can have architects, you can have renderings of your vision, and then you bring, it's like a community conversation, like a community cafe. So oftentimes we'll, like, did we get this right? This is what we heard, this is the vision. And you get to hear from neighbors, residents, community, all who live, work, and serve. So charrettes have been a critical part of my work. Mm-hmm.
I gave you the mic. I know I wanted to be able to pick up some of the folks out there.
What's next?
Well, right now I am selling some of my portfolio in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I am also a strategic consultant, so I'm consulting. I'm a strategist. I love living into that side of my skill set and my heart. So I have a couple of deals running that I don't have to own, which feels good, but I can be a connector in the space.